There's something about the way his laughter breaks through the noise, a melodic chord played beneath the cacophony of bright lights and adoring chants. You'd think, if you were me, that such a detail would fade into the background, lost among the flashes of cameras and the rhythmic cadence of applause. Yet it slices through like a warm knife, and I remember him as a boy, chasing the sunlight on his bike, cheeks flushed and eyes gleaming with irrepressible mischief. Now, standing before me in a room saturated with anticipation, that laughter resonates with an intimacy I thought fame and time would erase. Mesmerizing, a beacon cutting through the vast ocean of anonymity I've wrapped myself in. As the event unfolds around us, my fingers tread light trails over the glossy surface of photographs, each a piece of his history, captured and curated for the wide eyes of yearning fans. I'm here, standing inches away from it all, yet occupying a sphere entirely my own. He's changed. There's a sophistication in the way his body moves, in every nuanced flicker of expression that gives so little away. But it's in those moments when I catch his face in profile, when he's speaking to someone else, that the vestiges of that boy appear, hidden beneath craft and charisma, a ghost wrapped in glimmer. Luke, it's been. How long has it been? His voice, soothing like honey balm, pulls me from my thoughts and back to him. The distance in our years shrinks immediately as he stands across from me, pieces of past binding through the present. Each word curls gently against me, carrying, mute, tones of reminiscence, its weight felt, but deliberately untethered. Years, Leo, more than I care to count. I try for levity, injecting my reply with a tilt of nonchalance that masks the tremor of nostalgia swirling beneath. Years of not knowing, not seeing, yet my heart thrums in response to the near-forgotten affection his presence conjures, almost a conspiracy against reason, when all rationality insists on overlooking whispers from what was once dear. His eyes, the deep-set pools reflecting lights overhead, glint with something unsaid, a shade you'd miss if you weren't looking closely. But, having known him, having watched him grow into who he is today, a sense of melancholy colors his admiration. He holds my gaze just a breath longer than necessary, scanning the contours of our story, filling in the blanks of our fragmented friendship with smiles that don't quite reach. I find myself silently wishing, pleading for the surface that separates us to crack, to let through some semblance of honest recognition. "Seems like you've been busy," he remarks, effortlessly easing between formal and familiar, his charm a skill wielded with precision. His eyes shift to the small, understated pieces I'm showcasing, still painting what the world chooses to ignore. The accusation rolls out tenderly, peppered with amusement, though laden with truth. "You could say that," I respond, a playful shrug accompanying my words, a gesture of dwindling confidence. "Your world and mine, they rarely intersect anymore." He nods, his mask perfectly intact, flawless as the lines. There's a cunning order in the way public faces operate, like synchronizing the ticking beats of a clock, where timing measures how close you can get to the truth without falling into it. But there's something in Leo's pause, a gentle flinch that, in its subtlety, betrays a deeper current spanning restlessly beneath his composed exterior. I can only wonder if he too calculates each moment with precision, lest vulnerability reveals the contour of what lies beneath. What does this fame mean anyway? Perhaps the truth of our bond is its contagion, an invisible thread weaving emotion through each stolen glance, each celebrated achievement, and each coveted disguise. We're trapped in recollections and identity, halfway dissolved into what was and what could have been. He an idol, me an Aaron. Tist, we take on roles almost perversely, performing on this vast stage where authenticity must always be our enemy. I find myself wondering if somewhere, deep in those unfiltered depths behind his eyes, he's plotting revenge against whatever binds us to a distance neither chose. Leo's hand brushes mine, its touch a whisper that threatens to undo the deliberate space between us, a silent pact never outwardly confirmed. I've missed this, Luke. Your art, I mean, makes me feel real again somehow. His voice softens, barely carrying over the hubbub, yet it strikes a chord that rings clear, leaving me breathless on a tide of raw recognition. But before I can respond, assure him that this feeling is mutual, that in this shared space, away from the watchful eyes and masked conversations, we are still those boys caught in an unraveling web of potential. The moment phrase. A handler approaches, pulling at Leo's attention, drawing him back into the embrace of eager fans. We should catch up, after, Leo suggests, though his eyes linger the fraction needed for hope to settle in, a silent promise cloaked in fleeting duration. That sounds, I start, willing composure, but the enormity of what hasn't been said sits heavily on my tongue. Right, it's been long. A nod exchanged, lasting enough to challenge the intention behind its choreography, stands as the overture to our unspoken arrangements, between words and truths, amidst public facades. As he moves away, and I am forced to descend into solitude once again, the room feels a touch smaller, the noise a bit heavier, yet in its completion, anxiety, a realization breeds slowly, steadily. The intimacy painted by fragments we dare not voice shapes what could become the turning point of our familiar yet estranged reunion. The room was awash in a sea of fan-driven fervor, every subtle twitch of the air charged with anticipation. Leo stood at the edge of this spectacle, his smile polished to perfection under the onslaught of flashing cameras. His presence commanded the attention of all, yet my gaze held steadfast to the subtle nuances shading his expression, small fractures in the facade that only someone who knew him intimately might notice. As the crowd drew him back into its relentless embrace, a sense of yearning threaded its way through the endless noise, tugging at something deep within me. Across the space, a rising musician, the flavor of the season perhaps, stood affably engaged in conversation, casting a shadow of intrigue on the younger fans who lapped up every nuance of the interaction as though they were guilty of housing secret knowledge. Their whispers, wild fantasies anchored in perceived alliances, filtered through the din. Excited speculation bound them together, spinning tales of romantic possibilities that Leo entertained with gentle humor, his laugh a soft buffer that deflected the intensity of their desires. I watched, my stance betrayed by a slight tension, as the corners of Leo's eyes tightened when the musician touched his arm, in that casual way such gestures are often meant to be, a camaraderie gesture turned public spectacle. As I scrutinized the scene, an odd piece of information extracted itself from the mesh of connections. Their pairing reminded me of certain constellations that meant nothing on their own, but when observed collectively, narrate an unexpected legend. Unseen by the adoring throng, Leo flicked his gaze toward me for the briefest moment, a silent plea masked by composure. Inside me, calculations unfolded, mapping the complex terrain of public image against personal allegiance. How much longer would Leo be willing or able to play this game, where the stakes were the images of ourselves that the public consumed with relish? The thoughts swirled, forming conspiracies in the shadows, whispered reminders of old promises and the rebellion I entertained against such constraints. Beside me, a young fan gasped, her breath catching on the assumption of their entwined destiny, and I couldn't help but offer a soft chuckle, tinged with irony. Wishful thinking, I murmured to no one in particular. The fan cast a look that suggested both curiosity and agreement. I reveled in how my tone left things unspoken, yet oddly agreed upon. Leo's mask, as imperceptible yet as rigid as ancient stonework in the face of this public display, never faltered. His practiced interactions were a performance honed over years, his smile never faltering even as I caught the brief flicker of discomfort dance over his features. Despite his outward charisma, our shared history simmered beneath the surface, its existence the undercurrent we dared not expose amid so many watching eyes. Lingering memories painted themselves vivid in the mind's eye, memories tethered to moments that held us as children battling against the patterns society now sought to impose. In a breath, the surreal realization of being a spectator in one's own story pressed upon me, a silent challenge against the familiar narrative that threatened to drown the authenticity of our connection beneath a tidal wave of strategic alliances. Yet, through this sea of well-crafted congeniality, a flicker of rebellion sparked in my chest, the defiance enough to fuel the flame of what had once been pure, unencumbered friendship. As the evening wore on, the rhythm of the event became too predictable, the ritual performances equal parts glamorous and suffocating. Yet I kept watch, keenly attuned to the periphery, aware that just beneath the surface lay potential for confrontation, a reckoning of sorts with the staged whimsy that danced around us. Each subtle shift in Leo's demeanor became my anchor, grounding me amidst the fevered cries of starstruck adoration. The moment arrived, as fans often do, unexpected yet unmistakable. Leo's gaze swept the room, landing briefly on me before settling back into the practiced routine of occupational charm. In this exchange lived a quiet understanding, one that transcended spoken word, defying the conspiracy of fame that sought to confine us in its arbitrary narratives. As the fans' adoration crescendoed, the inevitability pulsed through me. The confines of such symbolic currency, a public affair etched by their fantasies, began to dissolve, revealing a path forward steeped in natural intimacy and the authenticity that only time-worn familiarity affords. The tension prickled under my skin, the promise of release hidden within this shared gaze, an unvoiced pact, a map of subtle frictions charting the space where our paths converged. For no such moment is fated to remain unobstructed, for our road was paved with the ironies of all we'd become bound to present. In this atmosphere, both volatile and tender, resided the catalyst, a turning point where depth hid in the folds of quiet gestures and unscripted truths. The evening waned, but before the cycle could complete its circle, understanding forged its way through the haze, transporting us beyond the charade, staking claim to the honesty obscured by our public personas. For what we stood to reclaim lay not only in this created sphere, but within the stark confines of the unspoken emotions that had come to color our bond, longing standing in rebellion against the spectacle of our supposed alliances. The room hummed with a fevered pulse, a living organism of sound and light. It was easy to lose oneself in the rhythmic ebb and flow of cheers, yet here in this corner, I could hear my heartbeat just a touch louder than the cacophony. Leo had stepped away, a fleeting absence camouflaged as casual mingling, but to me, it felt like the disturbance of gravity. He was close enough to draw in the invisible threads connecting us, but far enough that they strained with tenuous tension. In the distance, the crowd had become an intricate tapestry, faces blurred into a haze of expectancy, an audience greedy for the spectacle that never arrived. I was left watching their fantasy unfold like an elaborate illusionist's trick, with Leo slated as the leading illusion. Despite the insistent mythology fans built around him and others, I'd seen beneath the veneer, a privilege granted by the echoes of shared histories. The fans began chanting, a fervent pairing convenience they'd adopted, merging Leo's image with that rising musician. The room was charged with a misplaced conspiracy. I dissected the absurdity through narrowed eyes, allowing myself the solace of knowing these forces were merely shadows, a distraction from the real that lay just outside their peripheral vision. A subtle shift in the air pulled my gaze to the periphery, where Leo, now a silhouette etched in hesitance, lingered near another collection of voices. There, a shared conversation drifted past the flimsy barrier of anonymity. It took only a nuance of tone, a wistful undercurrent in a familiar voice, to summon the past. Those summers at your uncle's place. The words floated, nostalgic with a sweetness that permeated even the murmur of the crowd. I could see him clearly now, the artist, his profile softened in the twilight of recognition, eyes swimming in reminiscences powerful enough to paint eternal mornings by a familiar lake. Before the fans' narratives, before the stage lights and constant scrutiny, there lay uncomplicated days that were ours alone. Leo joined them, not as the idol, but as a cohort in these sacred memories. It was here that I saw the heaviness in his stance, the unmistakable vulnerability in the distance between the present and what could only be grasped in recollection. The leftover child within him, the one who had once proudly declared war on mosquitoes with a makeshift sword, of which lemon juice was the weapon of choice, stood bare before me. My breath caught at the absurdity of it all, yet warmed by the gentle revelation that lingered like unspoken truth. For a moment, the ship-carrying frenzy faded into irrelevance, outstripped by the gravitational pull of shared history. Their conversation continued, weaving through nostalgia with layers I hadn't anticipated. Each remembered detail, the way their voices cracked with humor at some shared folly, felt like scattered clues in a puzzle only I could discern. I found myself calculating the trajectory from then to now, a chronicle of everything that thrived unclaimed by public discourse. Could it be, I wondered, a daring notion, that the eyes of the artist sought beyond Leo's assured facade, seeing the same hidden landscapes I had catalogued in overlapping memories? If so, how had those landscapes transformed? Deserts blooming with delicate possibility, sheltered beneath the edifice of public perception. Hanging on these threads was a conspiracy more intimate than fame could afford, a recognition of feelings that dared to defy the artificial alliances the world insisted upon. From my vantage, it was as if the paths converged beneath the surface, longing hidden within the crevices of these private exchanges. Yet there remained an unfamiliar dynamic, the uncertainty that accompanied me like a shadow since these realms became juxtaposed, my knowledge and what the artist presupposed. Leo's eyes met mine once more, a brief flicker through the throng, laden with an unexpressed question. It was the momentary, a conspiracy of our silent understanding, a clandestine accord that lived between our glances. A conspiracy, not of fame, but of shared solitude, masked by laughter and lists of tactics plotted against relentless insects. Could I identify what had passed from those childish battles into realms heavy with unsaid confessions? Even as we succumbed to fevered pretense and rising anticipation imbued by external pressures, I knew the boundary had shifted. The world calculated us, yet left untended the whispers of what we might become, free of the fractures that divided us. In the space between lingering words, faint and wispy, lived revelations uncharted by the frenzy of adulation. Their unexpected resonance gently unfolded truths, marking a fragile cusp where vulnerability fluttered. Understanding emerged, verged not from coerced fantasy, but from that lone whisper echoing the intimacy of nostalgia and possibility of love, unshackled. As dusk drew the chandelier's last embrace, an unforeseen promise manifested, wrought not in turmoil, but in whispered sincerity beneath wordless exchange. all flexed around this, waiting for the moment to bloom into honesty crafted in seasons long past, daring to stand, unperformed, yet deeply real. Amid the hum of conversations fading into the twilight, my eyes lingered on him, a solitary figure encased in the evening's melancholy. The crowd, they were an amalgam of echoing laughter and exclamations, an incessant tide washing against the shores of our private world. Yet there he stood, his gaze alight with something beyond what the evening offered, a flicker of unspoken intimacy that beckoned from the depths of forgotten summers. It was in moments like these that the world blurred around the edges, and the stage upon which we danced our convoluted ballet, a performance of smiles and distant stares, seemed to disintegrate. It was a conspiracy of silence, one perhaps measured amongst the spectrum of stars, subtle, unquantifiable. And so, caught between the obligations of a crafted persona and the untamed longing for something real, I stepped towards him, heart pounding in my throat like a bass drum in a sleepy jazz bar. "Busy evening, huh?" he murmured, his smile gently falling short of his eyes. Those eyes, artful in their ability to simultaneously reveal and conceal, were the constellation I had sought then, a compass guiding me through the labyrinth of solitude fame had etched. "Busy indeed," my voice replied, comfortable and distant like the stretch of a long road. The truth was, every syllable, every casual word spoken between us seemed a part of a larger puzzle, a plot of wistful nostalgia, serpentine desires. Behind the guise of politeness, frustration surged, a quiet revolt against the theater swirling around me. A part of me, aching with unrelenting anticipation, Aeon yearned to peel back layers of expectation, recreate broken dialogues, a conspiracy crafted for the sole purpose of accurately revealing what had been left unsaid for too long. "What do you think?" I began, the words slipping through the cracks of my resolve like sand. "Of everyone pairing us with different people. They've all got a cosmic love story plotted, I imagine." He paused, eyes shifting to meet mine, surprise tethered to relief in their depths. The weight of what I dared to express hung heavily in the charged air between us, an odd yet necessary piece of information that punctured the veil of our practiced detachment. "They live in fantasies we navigate," he responded, voice a whisper, vulnerable and sincere. If only reality was as straightforward as their tales. Ere it was, the vulnerability flexing itself amidst the shadows, an unspoken pact between us, a shared strategy woven from lifetimes skirting around unspoken truths, calculations swerved towards possible, tentative acceptance, the devastation of honesty. Caught in this surge of emotion, I forged forward, driven by the need to unravel myself before him, the abstractions long lodged in the folds of our friendship. My voice softened, a gentle cascade dissolving inhibitions. It's maddening, isn't it, to orbit around each other, pretend the center doesn't hold? Why keep pretending? His eyes fastened onto mine, and I saw flickers of something heartbreaking yet profound, perhaps revenge not against something external, but against the restraints placed upon the honesty we craved. Alpha. Cades seemed to collapse in that moment, a quiet earthquake signaling renewal, a healing rooted in the simple act of saying what needed to be said, and finally, the exhilarating acknowledgement of our shared entanglement. My breath caught as I confessed, the words flowing as unstoppable as the waves at high tide. "I've been longing for. There's something here, something old yet untested. I wish we could brave it." Silence stretched, deliberate, and then he smiled, genuinely this time, a smile that held within it the promise of revolutions born more of introspection than conflict. His reply was a gentle, grateful exhalation. Controversial, transformative. I've wished that too. Whispers against the chaos, he began, his voice like an echo encased in trust. Let's break through, I whispered, daring both him and myself, weary of the roles we performed, craving beyond the plot lines others constructed around us. And so, stood upon the precipice, as fragile and precarious as hope itself, I surrendered, pressed against the boundaries, challenging, aching towards honesty. He reached for my hand, a simple gesture bridging spaces that had long since separated us. It was a moment entwined with intimacy, raw and untouched by the spectators lurking beyond. In that singular embrace, the fear and pretense ripped away, leaving only a truth we could warm ourselves upon, a reality crafted not by the world's stories, but by the legacy we dared to create together. The weight of his gaze felt like a whisper across a crowded room, weaving through the frenetic chaos without rush, without urgency. We stood here, beneath dimmed spotlights, the echo of 1,000 cheers muffled now into the background noise. It was in this poignant silence that the world receded, just him and I standing amidst the remnants of confessions unfolding. He blinked, his eyes holding a curious mixture of disbelief and relief, like the unexpected revelation of a conspiracy theory. Our silence was a calculated pause, each breath carrying the promise of unsaid words. Could he trace the map of longing etched across the lines of my face? There was no need to feign ignorance anymore, no pretense to uphold. "Did you," he began, letting his words trail off as if afraid to disturb the fragile equilibrium we'd just created. His hand slipped into his pocket, a small gesture packed with nervous tension, fingers searching for a misplaced certainty. I stood rooted, tethered by the gravity of this moment, by the revelation shared between us. My own words threatened to escape, an unguarded whisper intent on dismantling the barriers of familiarity. "Did I mean it?" I interjected, giving voice to his unspoken question. My words hovered there, a secret conspiracy revealed. The truth was undeniable. We were more than mere acquaintances trapped by the glare of celebrity and reverence, clinging to a fading childhood graph. An artist's truth, unfocused and sentimental, yet undeniably ours. The air thickened, wrapping us in an embrace of untold intimacy. "I didn't realize." He paused, a grin ghosting across his face before evaporating into sincere contemplation. "I didn't realize how much, how deeply." His voice faded again, the implication hanging palpable between us. I returned his gaze, the answer plain in the depths of his expression, the soft vulnerability that spoke of years spent chasing what could never be replicated, our past, our connection. I felt it too, I admitted, contradictory and fervent. My confession was a calculated risk, daring to leap over rooftops while others watched from below. Yet it felt so right, like an igniting flame under the mask of pretend. It was more than just an echo. It was the rhythm that pulsed through the spaces we'd always left unoccupied. The artist released a shaky breath, as if surrendering the barricade behind which. "It's strange," he mused softly, almost to himself, "finding something real in all this noise, like a forgotten melody finding its harmony again." I could see it then, the tension that drained from his stance, the tentative hope unfurling through the tips of his fingers that rested now lightly upon my arm. There was disbelief, a relief so laden with consequence that we could almost taste it. When his fingers curled slightly, the action was simple, entirely natural, yet filled with profound meaning. Our gestures exchanged like lost messages deciphered after lifetimes of misunderstanding, packed with shared purpose, disguised as slick dialogue in this daring spectacle. It's a controversial possibility, I muttered shyly, embracing the notion of freedom. You. His laughter could have predicted that daring liberation. His laughter, a warm, quiet rebirth of sound, echoed just between us, the tremor of it sending a shiver through my skin. As fragile as the final note of a forgotten song, it persisted like a promise. Controversial? Perhaps. His face softened once more, a tenderness left unguarded and unabashed. But that doesn't make it wrong. We stood there, caught in the delicate transition from fearful pretense to genuine disclosure. It was strange to consider this, our strange asylum in a world demanding performances. Together, in that unprecedented understanding, we crafted a shared embrace untouched by unwelcome spectators. A sanctuary, crafted in the warmth of mutual admiration, slipped quietly into realization. Introspection, replacing regret. I reached for him, fingers brushing against the crisp fabric of his shirt, reassuring him, reassuring us both of the tangible reality binding us to this moment. His warmth mingled with my own, twisting around the remnants of doubt and sending it adrift upon whispered currents. Stepping closer, neither of us spoke, yet the air crackled with our unspoken words. It was a deliberate choice, a revolutionary act, performed not through battle, but an introspective dance, a whisper bouncing from heart to heart. "No more pretending," he declared softly, the decision tangible in the horizon we dared not dream of until now. It was as if we had somehow discovered the most obscure truth, knowing without seeing, sensing without speaking, an odd gem that glimmered beneath lie. Fez's relentless plotlines. Within this newly forged perception, every past conspiracy unraveled, every calculation laid bare. There was no revenge underlined within our path. It was the simplicity casting away all else that created this flawless outreach for connection. As his hand found mine, the universe still existing on the periphery paused for our offering, our shared plunge into the unknown. An awakening spread across the space mappings between us, drawn with assurance and once unfulfilled hope. In that singular embrace, we discovered not just a longing once disguised, but a creation of our own, far beyond the narrative we had been given. Together, as we braved simultaneous truths, shared words echoed loud, disturbing the spaces no longer inhabiting fear. In this compactest of revelation, as dispensements, we bid farewell to facades, craving for nothing else but the honesty we so intensely yearned to protect. Such was the tender shift echoing within, our commitment to craft a story unfettered by the world's intrusive choreography, an open promise contained in the light of mutual understanding. The room was a blur of soft murmurs and dim lights, a strangely intimate oasis amidst the chaos, a respite before the storm waned for good. There was a subtle alignment between us now, like stars finding their rightful place in an expansive sky. His hand, still warm in mine, felt like the first gentle note of an unwritten symphony, a silent promise of things yet to unfold. It was odd, really, to find oneself here, sharing such an understated triumph. Weeks ago, the notion of stepping away from my carefully curated public existence seemed as unattainable as landing on Mars. And yet, here we were, contemplating a future that breathed freely outside the constraints of fame. Fame, the elaborate masquerade I had once embraced, willingly woven into a fabric riddled with conspiracies and expectations. I glanced at him, and there was something achingly profound in the way his eyes held mine. The artist, with his weathered sketchbook and bold, expressive strokes, now seemed oddly vulnerable, a tenderness in his gaze that welcomed slow revelation. In the glow of our shared understanding, The calculative facade I had meticulously crafted dissolved into irrelevance. Suddenly, revenge and betrayal appeared as relics of a narrative never meant for us. "Do you remember," he began, his voice a gentle intrusion into my thoughts, "how we used to lay out those bizarre plans for revenge against the world's most unjust truths?" The reminiscence was heavy with nostalgia, yet tinged with the mischievous sparkle that had defined our childhood conspiracies. I chuckled softly, the sound weaving between us like a familiar thread of companionship. Our plans were always a bit too ambitious, weren't they? I mean, bringing down those vile teachers, exposing the town baker's secret ingredient fiasco, we were destined to conquer the world, or at least misunderstand it strategically. His laughter was music, a melody that filled the spaces between his words with warmth. Yet there was an uncertainty hovering at the edges. It feels strange contemplating the future now, like inhabiting a dream we thought to abandon. He was right. The world was vast, and within it lay the obscure truths we had always chased, the same ones we now stood on the edge of apprehending. I squeezed his hand lightly, my resolve sharpening like a prism catching the light. I think it's more about creating our own, one untethered from all that we were told to become. His silence was firm, yet porous enough to invite conversation, a silent acknowledgement of the gravity in what was committed. And what if the world wants otherwise? "If it does," I replied, deliberately slow, considering the weight of each syllable, "we paint something different. We bulldoze over old scripts. Maybe we'll become the odd piece of information that people stumble upon and realize their own desires are less controversial." As our words settled into the quiet, the path left behind shimmered faintly, a kaleidoscope of discarded dreams and newfound intimacy. We were explorers, charting a course through the unfamiliar narrative we had yet to write. "I admit," he continued softly, his voice breaking through, "I thought fame was all you cared about, that it consumed you. But here it feels, well, it's different." His eyes were pools of truth, clear depths reflecting shades of vulnerability and understanding. It was my turn for introspection, the honesty catching me unguarded, reviving memories that I had kept neatly folded and tucked from sight. I was afraid, I confessed, letting the sentiment pour forth, afraid of losing parts of myself to narratives they wrote for me, frustrated that it made us strangers locked behind glass walls. Breathing deeply, I recognized the unexpected solace in laying bare these truths, sharing secrets no longer concealed. He nodded, a subtle but encompassing gesture that marked the shifting sands beneath us, the terrain. Now, I echoed, savoring the sound as if tasting it for the first time. "I want a future that allows room for paints and brushes, where we're protagonists in our own tale. Fame can't dictate who we become." There was a certitude in my voice that surprised me, a promise unconcealed and rooted as naturally as the ocean meets the shore. Our conversation tapered into stillness, echoing with truths we now shared, uncomplicated by the intrusive choreography that once dictated every step. Indeed, the plans sketched in silence tonight would sculpt a shared path forward, a winding trail fit for explorers willing to brave unknown frontiers without the fear of reverting to silence. And as the event's final curtain descended, there was a discernible shift, a nascent light illuminating the terrain of our unfolding journey. Within it lay not just the opportunity for a life steeped in creativity and genuine love, but the chance to craft, together, an existence unfettered by another's orchestration.